Hello, everybody.
Hello.
What's up? Welcome. Woo! Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hi, Lisa.
Hello.
How's it going?
Good.
Hello, Ryans. I love it. Welcome. Welcome back.
That hair just keeps getting better and better, dude.
Hi, Ryan. Hi,
Hey,
everybody.
Mitch. What's up, y'all? We got lots of people joining. There's about 50 or so of us tonight joining.
Wow.
Our largest August event ever.
You want them to see you?
What's up, everybody? I'm leaving. Here we go. I'm out of practice.
Are we
Let me do this thing. Hey, y'all, can you hear me? I hope you can. Last time I did, it's been about 3.5 weeks since I taught a class, so I'm a little rusty, but I feel so honored to be with y'all again. I get to eat a plate of cheese alongside each of you tonight, so I couldn't be more excited or more thrilled. I did turn off the microphones just now so that you'll be able to hear Pat and I as we go through the course of the evening. Welcome. My name is John Antonelli. I'll be your secondary host tonight. I'll just make sure that the chat window is being managed correctly, that people are being admitted from the weight room, that if you have any questions and Pat is in the flow of a great joke, we don't interrupt him, but I can interrupt him a few minutes later. This is one of the more exciting classes that we get to offer. This is where my cheese geekery comes out because Pat, as if you didn't take our first Cheese 201 class in July, this is our second in a series. Pat is a remarkable human being, loves cheese science. He is a PhD candidate student. I would, right? I mean, you kind of shook your head, kind of didn't, but you were-ish. And so you can.
It's an off and on thing. It's complicated. Using Facebook speak. Yeah. Everything
is a little complicated during this pandemic. Pat runs as a side hustle, as his sort of passion projects, cheesescience.org, which is an amazing resource. He's been an incredible friend of our business for years. Hey, Nicholas. Hey, Matt. And we are thrilled to have him back. And tonight we're going to be talking about flavor compounds. We're going to be diving deep. He's got an awesome background, as you'll see in just a few minutes, a virtual background that'll make your mouth water. But Pat, he did just start a new job on Monday. So later on today, we're going to give him a round of applause for actually getting off to come and hang out with us tonight because I imagine this was in your offer letter that it was a prior commitment, so you made sure it was a possibility. And so I really appreciate it. Those of you that have got the plate in front of you, this is what our plate looks like tonight. We've got 7 cheeses going around in order, starting with this sort of fluffy white cloud. Put this at your 12 o'clock, this little fluffy cheese. That's where we're going to start tonight. One of the main things that I want to suggest, which is that as we go, we're going to be talking about flavor compounds. Pat is, in particular, is going to be diving deep into this. One of the recommendations that I encourage is that taste without the pairing first. Spend time enjoying the cheese before you get to the pairing because the pairing can be overwhelming in some cases when you're trying to identify a very particular flavor compound within a cheese. And so each cheese has its own pairing, and I will add those notes into the chat window so you can see them as we go. Pat really kind of runs the show, and I will be, again, looking and watching the chat window. So if you haven't already opened it, go ahead, open that chat window so that you can ask questions, you can engage. You can just give lots of thumbs up as far as I'm concerned because the cheese smells outstanding tonight and I know Pat is fantastic. And so we're gonna go in order. There's 7 cheeses, 7 pairings, and you should all have a menu in front of you here. Again, I'll type it in as we go, so in case you don't have one. But I think I'm ready to dive in. So, Pat, I'm going to unmute you. Do you want to? Oh, you know what, Pat? Do you want me to do I'm going to do the little get your palette lined up for everybody so they're ready to go once you take over. How does that sound?
Sounds good. Yeah.
All right. So more than ever, I want you guys to do this with me. This on your plate are the little cuicos, which that and along with the bread you can eat at any time throughout the course of the tasting. They're not pairings; they're just accompaniments. But take one of those cuicos, and I want you to go ahead. It looks like a little corn nut. I want you to pinch your nose, and then put it in your mouth and start chewing. And pay attention to what's developing on your tongue. You should pick up notes of salt, maybe some bitter, maybe a little umami. There's sour and sweet are the other two flavors your tongue picks up. And when you feel like you really have this thing figured out and you know what it tastes like, release your nose and exhale out through the back of your mouth and into your nostrils. All of a sudden, there's this major flavor explosion. These compounds that weren't there a few seconds ago are now very highly noticeable. Your olfactory has millions of taste memories built into it. And so you can really, using your nose, get a much deeper, sometimes longer flavor profile. So what Kendall and I like to say is that tongue gives us taste, the nose gives us aroma, and those two things combined give us flavor, which is why we're here tonight. So if you decided not to pinch your nose, and I saw you because your video's on, you might want to try it again because it's really cool. And I'm going to do it as soon as I hand it over to Pat. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for being amazing. During since the pandemic started, you guys have been incredible supporters of ours so that we can live our mission to do good, eat good, and support our team members and support our cheesemakers. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Pat, who is amazing and will crush it from here on out. Pat, you are spotlighted now. Welcome.
Oh, wow. Thank you, John, for that great introduction and taking us through the basics of tasting. And I will say the pros do it that way as well. When we're trying to detect the main taste, what occurs on the tongue, you always plug your nose first, as John's demonstrating, and that way you're robbing your olfactories of airflow. And so it's just like things taste a little bland when you're stuffy or sick. You're doing that artificially here, and then you let go, you get that puff of air. Retronasal olfaction, if we use the technical term, or frogging, as it's sometimes funnily called. You can encourage this by closing your lips and going like this. He's perfect. Yeah, it works even better in a bar as a pickup line or as a pickup version. I've had mixed results, but depends on how late in the night it is. Without further ado, I do have some slides to show, but we'll try to keep that just as a visual backdrop of a discussion, hopefully in the chat. Anyone wants to share what they're tasting as we're going along, that would be great. Little housekeeping first. I just want to go through a little bit about the basics of flavor chemistry and cheese chemistry. Then we'll dive into each cheese individually and talk about each cheese. Will have lots of flavors, but we're going to highlight one in particular that's in a high intensity so we can talk about it. And then we'll go from there. And I've done this both ways, where sometimes we start with the cheeses and then we go into the chemistry and vice versa. And after everyone's eating cheese, you're sort of done. So we'll do it this way first. I really like to think of a cheese as being 3 stages of a lifespan. And I like to make it a parallel to the human lifespan. We have infancy, the day the cheese is made, adolescence, that's angsty period, a week later, and then maturity, depending on the cheese. That can be days, weeks, years, depending on the cheeses that can be aged. And the day a cheese is made, I like to call that infancy because it really isn't a nascent state. It doesn't have much flavor yet. Some cheeses are designed this way. Fresh cheese curds are the perfect example. You're supposed to eat them the day or two they're made, not really after that. Adolescence, a couple days old. Not many cheeses actually do that. If you think about it, most cheeses, I mean, you can make a fresh cheese at home, do it that way, but just for marketing purposes, usually you want cheese with a little more age on it. And maturity is where a cheese really shines. And you may hear cheese be called the the controlled breakdown or decomposition of milk, and we're going to talk about what that is, what's breaking down in cheese's maturity to give you flavor. So first, let's talk about what's in cheese from a chemical perspective. There's some other words for these. You may see these in other foods, as these aren't unique to milk or cheese necessarily. Some are, but water, very important. It's sort of the bathtub all of these reactions are happening in. Even really dry cheeses, like say Parmesan, still contain some water. You just don't notice it that much, but there's still about 20% water, believe it or not. If there's no water in any of these products, I mean, they'd be just pure powder. You have lactose, which is the natural milk sugar. You see lac in there. The sugar got named after the milk and not the other way around, which is pretty cool. Dairy is the most studied food, so lots of scientific terms get its root from dairy beginnings. We have fat globules, which are one of the two main components of flavor creation in cheese, the other being the protein component here. Casein and whey. If you've ever heard of curds and whey, Little Miss Muffet, eat her heart out. Casein is what curds are. It's the solid portion of the cheese. It's the structure of many, many cheeses. Whey is drained away. It's the liquid. Some cheeses contain a little bit of it. We're going to have some tonight that may have some residual whey. If you ever make ricotta or mascarpone or paneer, those have a lot of whey. But mostly it's casein. And the breakdown of casein, the breakdown of fat, is what really gives cheese most of its pronounced, interesting flavors, at least with age. And then we have minerals, calcium and phosphate. Not so much on a flavor front, but they're really important for the structure of cheese, for the nutrition of cheese. Perhaps we can discuss those in a different tasting class one of these weeks, months down the line. So here's how all those pieces are arranged. If you were put cheese under a microscope, this is how I like to look at it, at least from a cartoon perspective. You have these blue spheres, that's the protein sponge or matrix, that's what you're biting into, that's the structure. You have these yellow spheres here, those are the fat globules. And then this light blue background, that's where all that residual water, the lactose, the flavor molecules are forming. That's sort of like that bathtub where everything's sitting. And it's transformed from milk into cheese. This is just a little touch on that. This isn't a cheese making class, but water is usually removed. And just like if you think about concentrating things, if you boil tree sap into maple syrup, its flavor intensifies. The same thing can be said about cheese. Since you're removing a lot of water as part of the cheese making process, you're going to concentrate what's left, all these other components. So that gives more potential for flavor. You have lactose, that's sugar. It's fermented into lactic acid. Cheese makers add bacteria to do that, called cultures, starter cultures. And this kind of reaction is common in many of our favorite foods. For example, the yeast in beer do this. It's not lactose they're breaking down, it's glucose. And they're forming alcohol and acid and all sorts of things. Sourdough, another example of taking a sugar and converting it to an acid. And this is just its example in cheese. You're forming that lactic acid, which is, you can think of the tang or sour note that John mentioned earlier. And then finally, this fat and protein, as I mentioned earlier, not only does protein contribute to its structure, but when you break down protein, its individual pieces called amino acids and peptides are themselves big flavor bombs, but they can go on and react with other compounds and create even other interesting flavors. And the exact same is true of fat. Fat intact doesn't really taste like much. You think of butter, maybe has a slight buttery flavor, which actually isn't caused by the fat. That's a different story. But only through its breakdown with age and enzymes and the microbes sort of eating it and spitting up what it doesn't like anymore, you get really interesting flavors. And that's what these reactions are, if you want to talk about it from a scientific perspective. When we say, you know, cheese ripening or cheese aging, we're going to have cheeses today that range from a few weeks old to a few years old, or many years old, actually 10 years old. These are the reactions that's going on in those cheeses. You have the proteolysis, which is the breakdown of protein, as I mentioned earlier. You have lipolysis, which is the breakdown of fat. And you have glycolysis, which is the breakdown of sugar. For anyone, Latin scholars in the room, proteo, lipo, glyco, those all mean protein, fat, and sugar, respectively. And each of these cause a lot of flavor on their own, but it's the interaction of all these components in the cheese, let alone if you add a pairing with it, that really creates a nice little bouquet of interesting flavors. So just to give you a quick primer on the reactions, a good rule of thumb, as mentioned earlier, is that big intact things don't really interact much with your nasal passages or olfactory glands, like John mentioned. Big intact things are too big to lock into the receptor, so they don't taste like much. So you think of intact protein not having much. Enzymes can be added, called proteases. A cheesemaker can add these. They can be natural in the milk. They can be natural in the environment. Microbes are chock full of them. Basically, you can think of their metabolism as just a big baggie of enzymes that are breaking down the cheese for us and forming things called peptides. If you ever get a bitter note, which you will in some of these cheeses today, this is where that will come from. It has to do with a certain breakdown of protein, those bitter peptides. The aged cheddar we're going to have later is going to have some bitter, and it's supposed to have some bitter. Some things we want a little bit of bitterness as long as it's in balance. You can think of aged cheddar. You can think of black coffee, IPA beers. Bitterness is part of a good flavor profile when it was meant to be there. But the story doesn't stop there. That protein can continue to break down, and the bitterness can go away, can increase, other flavors can be generated. And you're going to see in the cheddar we have, bitter is going to be one main thing you can get, and then you're going to get another interesting flavor as well, and it has to do with the continued breakdown of this protein. On the fat side of things, you have this structure here called a triglyceride. Again, too big and bulky to really cause much flavor. The name triglyceride because it means it's 1, 2, 3 fatty acids connected to a glycerol molecule, just a little chemistry background, but not much flavor on its own. Enzymes, again, lipases break down this fat and can form free fatty acids. Now these, as the name implies, are free to float up, interact, lock in with receptors and cause flavors. They're what's known as volatile. And just like if you take a pot of water and boil on a stove, you see wisps of steam off the surface. That's the example of volatile water vapor. Think of this as the same thing occurring in the cheese. You can increase that volatility through many ways. One is increasing the breakdown, which you may not have much control over yourself, but you may also have other ways you can do it. For example, bringing the cheese to room temperature, like you saw in the waiting room that was set up for this class to make sure cheese at room temperature. Increase in temperature makes these molecules a little more likely to aerosolize and interact with your nasal passages, increase flavor. Manipulation, if you chew and manipulate in your mouth, don't just scarf it down. If you actually savor it and chew it around and roll it around your mouth, as nasty as that sounds, you'll definitely get more from it. And that's something I always suggest people to do. When I was training sensory panelists and they had trouble picking up interesting volatile aromas, I would say you're going to chew each piece of cheese 100 times before you're allowed to swallow it. And you'd be surprised how many more things you come up with if you just let it linger in your palate a little longer. I'm just going to check in on the chat, make sure we're not missing anything here. Okay.
Nothing yet. Nothing
Okay.
yet. I think for those of you that don't have the chat window open, feel free to ask Pat questions as we're going. But also, I had mentioned to other folks, if you're drinking something, let us know what you're drinking so I can potentially make pairing recommendations. And then if you're celebrating something besides Lisa's 40th birthday, woo woo, let us know what you're celebrating.
Thanks, John. Yeah, definitely. And happy birthday to Lisa. I'm gonna say this little diagram here of lipolytic flavors is dedicated to Lisa's birthday. There we go. On the next class, we'll dedicate a different graphic to someone else. So there we go. I'm not sure if that was a present, Lisa. Hopefully it wasn't too much of a detriment. And just like I mentioned earlier, most of the flavor potential in cheeses with age not only comes to just things break down when they get old and worn out, but also microbes have really complex metabolism, just like we do. So when they eat things and they break it down and they excrete it out, as non-appetizing as that sounds, that's flavor potential right there. And just to sort of reiterate, to circle back where we are, each one of these has to do with big things becoming small things and causing flavor. And that really is what flavor chemistry is at the end of the day. It's these small pieces, their various interactions and various structural changes are what cause all the flavors of all foods. In dairy, there's several levels of complication occur because we have a natural product, the milk, which contains its own set of enzymes and reactions. You have the environment in which it's made, in which it's aged, which have their own microbes and interactions. many cheeses, especially ones we're trying today, were made by real humans, sort of like literally leaning over a big pot of milk, stirring it, and who knows if some of their sweat dripped in. That's the source of microbes. And then they're adding microbes them intentionally to get flavor. So you can see lots of complications. So that if you taste something and your partner tasting alongside you taste something a little different, just know that's a natural part of the process. We each have something we're more acute to, more blind to, we like to say. So some people are blind to certain flavors. You may hear something called bitter blindness. That means you need really high levels of bitter before you detect it. And that applies to more than just bitter. It applies to almost any flavor compound and other things. Like, for example, rose aroma, which is caused by a very specific compound, which can sometimes be found in cheese. It's rare. I'm very sensitive to. I can pick it up really quickly. And I'm going to show you a flavor wheel in a second. One of its terms is called catty. It smells like cat urine, which can also occur in some cheeses. Something I'm also very sensitive to, which may be due to like growing up with a bunch of cats in the house. It's just something I acquired over time.
And Pat, we did a couple of years ago. We did a tasting where we did the progressive water cup test.
Oh, cool!
Salt, sweet, bitter, and it's basically it's pretty amazing. We'll do it again in the future at some point. But it's 7 different cups of water that have doubling of a concentration of sugar or an acid like citric acid, and you start by tasting pure water and then going up in these very small increments until you taste, say it's the citric acid, until you can pick up citric acid in the tasting. And so like out of 7 cups, some people will pick up the citric acid after only drinking 2, which means they're very sensitive to it. And some won't even taste it at the 7th. Like they won't even notice it. So it's an amazing thing how different all of our palates are. It's incredible to see.
It is, and it's something I'm always impressed with. And there's a lot of, as you might imagine, a lot of research is done into that, especially by food companies, because they'd like to take advantage of those palate differences. And some cool stats have been generated through the years. Like about 1 in 4 people are what we call bitter blind, which means it requires much higher threshold of bitterness before they can detect it. I see someone in the chat said they were bitter blind, Nicholas. And that just means Nicholas needs a little more bitter compounds before he can detect them, which also means a lot of foods that we may find unpleasing because they have high levels of bitterness, maybe Nicholas finds a little more appetizing. And these levels can change throughout your life as well. One reason why children don't like vegetables, other than, it's a trope and it's a stereotype, is that they're much more acute to bitterness than older people are. You lose that ability with age. The detection threshold goes up and up and up as you get older. And a lot of vegetables actually do have a certain small level of bitterness that just sort of fades over time, at least with us, because we can't taste it anymore. And the other flavors sort of predominate. We taste the sweetness, we taste the cruciferous broccoli note, those kinds of things. And that all has to do with changing over time and those kinds of things. So it's definitely, if you ever get a chance to do that again with the Antonellis, I suggest you do, because that's a really fun activity and can tell you a lot about yourself. And on that note, here's a wheel I put together a few years ago about flavors in cheese. It's a thought starter, so you can refer back to this. You can go to this link, cheesescience.org/wheel. I'll go to in a second to sort of walk you through it. It's just a compilation, I guess you can say, of various flavor notes possibly you could find in milk, cheese, and other dairy products. You won't find all of these in a single cheese. I mean, if you do, that's going to be a wild ride. But I like to say, instead of using the word sharp, we can be a little more descriptive, because I've asked a lot of people what sharp is, and you get something all over the map. One time I was working at a cheese shop, and we tasted through about 10 different cheeses until we finally settled on the sharp cheese that this customer is looking for, and happened to be a piece of brie. I never knew brie was sharp, but that person associated a mushroomy flavor, which we'll get to here in a minute, as being sharp. And that was just an interesting association they made. So I will go to this link real quick. Let me swap my share to a web page. Hopefully you can see this flavor wheel.
We sure can.
Okay, so if you go to cheesescience.org/wheel, you see the same thing I just showed you, but you can click on it, interact with it. I try to gamify it to encourage people to interact and make it a little more easier to digest the information. You can tell I researched education, so we'll see if any of this is effective. I do track mouse movements, complete disclosure here, so, but it's all anonymous, but I like to see where people click. And as you might imagine, some get clicked on more than others. A fun fact. So Caddy gets clicked on quite a bit, but one of these gets clicked on probably more than any of the others. And I'm going to leave that as a question for the group that maybe they can guess as the night goes on. Which flavor here people seem really interested in, always like to click on. But for example, you can click on one of these compounds. The word itself, grassy, gives you the definition, an example, and some other chemistry you can find it in. For example, acetaldehyde. Examples like green apple, that's the green apple flavor. You can find it in lots of yogurts and some fresh cheeses as well. Fruity esters, which we'll get to today, you can find that in many different cheeses. And we're going to taste hopefully some cheese here in a minute that shows that. So this is just something that if you're struggling to put a word to what you're tasting, it can be a good thought starter. Okay, we're gonna hop back over to this. And I think now is a good time to jump in and start tasting some of these cheeses.
Yeah, and the menu that everybody has is slightly wrong. This first cheese, it's not a plain Chev. It is a skier from Beetree, and Pat has it correct in his screen, and I'm going to be pasting it in to your screen here in just a second into the chat. So this is local, Pat. This is made about 15 miles from Austin. Local goat cheesemaker, Jenna at Beetree. So they're well known for their fresh Chev. They make an amazing halloumi. And then, of course, tonight we're tasting her skier, which has a really nice texture to it tonight. It's like a wet ricotta. And Pat, if you don't know, Pat doesn't have the cheeses in front of us. So this is the theoretical conversation. Our team, a bunch of our certified cheese professionals tasted the cheeses to try to hone in for Pat so that he'd have something specific. So I'm grateful for all those team members that did that for us.
As am I. So thank you, Antonelli team. It makes my job a little bit easier. So yeah, and I think the process that John walked you through earlier, where you stop up your nose, pinch your nose first and taste, that's perfect way to introduce this cheese, because acidity, that tanginess, does mainly occur on the tongue. Like John mentioned, your tongue can detect 5 to 6 basic tastes. It's a range because flavor chemists and physiologists are constantly arguing with each other. Right now, acid or sour, salty, sweet, bitter, umami, and fatty acid is a 6th one that's currently in contention as far as if it's going to be the 6th taste. But the acid in this one's coming from, like we mentioned earlier, it can be fermented by the lactose fermentation by starter cultures. Some cheesemakers add acid directly. If you ever see a cheese on the back, it says, it can say lactic acid, it can say acetic acid, which is just scientific word for vinegar. It can say citric acid. Those are the main ones used in food, at least. Sometimes, actually, it's pretty interesting. People get acid and bitter confused. About 1 in 7, in my experience, they can taste acid and bitter just fine, but they just flip the words in their mouth, in their mind rather. And what is acid they call bitter, and what is bitter they call acid. So this would be a great way to start off the night to make sure we're all clear on what acid is. And would love to hear about what people are tasting, if they're perceiving it, and after they unstop their nose, what other interesting volatiles they're getting as well. And I do want to address some folks in the chat said their guess was the most clicked on one or most interesting one on the flavor wheel is unclean, and that is indeed correct. And unclean is just a catch-all term professional dairy people use to say something tastes bad, but saying icky flavor doesn't sound very technical, so they say unclean. which is unfortunate because it makes it somehow seem like it was produced in unsanitary conditions. But the idea is it doesn't clean up on the palate very well. Let's see, when Matt is asking about the honeycomb with the skyr or the next cheese.
Yeah, I was just typing and kept spelling one word incorrectly over and over again. But yes, so the honeycomb is, it's chunk honey from Two Hives honey. So it's liquid honey with a little bit of the comb in it. But I think what is interesting as you continue to taste this cheese, and Stephanie is saying it's tart, lemony, dry. She feels a little like tannic attributes coming from it. It is a very powerful acidic cheese on the tongue. Pinching your nose and eating it, when it isolates the tongue really elevates, and it really makes that acid even more pronounced. And then when you release, it kind of mellows a little bit more and up into your nostrils. But what'll be interesting is pairing that real sweet honey flavor profile, the sugars, the glucose and fructose, or sucrose and fructose. What do we got? Sucrose and glucose in the honey. When you pair those two things with then this very acidic skyr, this is much more acidic than her Chev, which is why we ended up choosing a skyr, because it really showcases. But go ahead and pair them together and see what then happens to that flavor profile. But we had a question how you can tell between goaty and sheepy. Pat, I don't know if you want to address that. And you can't taste really any goat in this cheese, but it is a goat's milk cheese, so it might be a good time to talk.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I saw that. I forgot to talk about that. Thanks, John. Yeah, so goaty versus sheepy, that's actually, it's a little difficult. It takes quite a while and quite a few tastes to really start to differentiate in your mind, because the root of both flavors lies in similar compounds. It has to do with fatty acids, which we'll talk about specific examples here in a cheese down the road. And to me, probably one of the easiest ways of differentiating in your mind is you really have to put yourself on a farm, at least mentally, and just think about what goats smell like, because that's what their cheese tastes like, is in a good way. And it really does have that, I almost call it a barnyardy, sometimes almost comes off as crayon-like, crayon-like. I'm sorry, I get made fun of how I say crayons. I say crayons like cranberries, but it has that.
You save one syllable every time you say it. That helps.
I'm saying exactly, and I say crayon so much that it really adds. No, and then sheepy, on the other hand, it still has that sort of barnyardy type aroma and flavor to it, but to get that extra sort of sheepy notes, this is something that is actually very difficult, and a lot of flavor chemists disagree where it comes from, and especially how to describe it. I've heard some people almost call it smoky. I've also heard some people say almost fishy or marine-like. If you think about sort of like you're on the coast of a beach and it has a little bit of hints of that, and that is really strongly associated with sheep's milk for some reason. And it's quite the conundrum for the cheese flavor community right now. I'm actually writing a book chapter right now about cheese flavor, and everyone disagrees about where it comes from and how to differentiate goat and sheep's milk on a chemical perspective. So you might imagine this becomes increasingly hard when you're just trying to taste it. So that was a really long-winded answer of saying it's hard.
It's hard. And if you've ever gotten to spend time around the animals, the sheep's milk, when it tastes sheepy, tends to remind my mother-in-law, who they used to show sheep in 4-H and always shearing the wool. And so there's the lanolin, the oils from the animal tend to give off an aroma that ends up in a similar representation on the aroma on a sheepy cheese. So, and I equate the smell, the taste of a goat's cheese that would be considered goaty as the like aroma from a buck's pasture. Is again, traveling to the farms, you can picture and smell that when you're there. And that's why they use those words, because it actually is a good representation of being near the animals, like Pat started with.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Oh, there's some, let's see, some comments in the chat we should address. Stephanie said that the skyr was tart, lemony, dry, almost tannic. Definitely. It's actually, so all those sort of the tannic facet you're describing, for other folks, it sort of dries your mouth. It makes your tongue almost feel rough or like sandpaper. It's maybe tingling on the sides of the tongue. All that is a term we call astringency in a sensory perspective. Here, I'll write in the chat just so we can, so you can see how that's spelled. And tannins in wine cause astringency. High amounts of organic acids, like lactic acid in this cheese or citric acid in other cheeses, also cause astringency. They cause your tongue to feel as though it's drying out and getting rougher. And lots of different compounds can cause this. Acids are one really famous example, but the tannins in wine can also do it. Some other very niche sort of things can cause it as well. High amounts of salt can cause it. That's more just because it's literally drying your tongue. All those things. And the lemoniness also is coming from that acidity, of course. And then let's see, why do supermarkets put skyr in the yogurt section instead of the cheese section? That's a great question. And if you talk to most dairy people, myself included, you could think of cheese and milk being ends of a spectrum and yogurt being in the middle. And when you start thinking about that way, you can start thinking about skyr being between traditional yogurt and cheese. And so it's a difficult call to make, really, about where to put it. I've seen it in most grocery stores in the dairy section next to the yogurts. Stores are the really like advanced, well-developed cheese section, like the Antonelli's, of course. They'll list it with cheeses as well, but it's one of those where without some education, people, if you just say, oh, it's a really thick, tangy yogurt, it's sort of, you can understand what it is.
It sells easier than saying it's a really soft, acidic cheese.
Exactly.
Right. That doesn't sound so sexy when you say it that way. So Mitch, we have another question, and then we'll move on to the second cheese. A few people that don't like goat cheese ascribe a dirt-like flavor. Do you know if there's a specific compound, a group of compounds in goat milk that they may be more sensitive to? So does this, do you want to take a stab?
Yeah, no, this is something that actually comes up quite a bit. And so there's those fatty acids I talked about that are pretty important for goat and sheep's milk cheese. Goat milk, though, has special types of fatty acids in really high amounts. They're called branch chain fatty acids. They're just really complex molecules. And that's really what gives goat cheese its unique character. And like we said, everyone's palate's a little different. Everyone's nose is a little different. Some people really ascribe those and associate those with earthy, dirt-like. I've heard wet cement. I've heard lots of interesting takes on those kinds of compounds. And I've actually been lucky enough that at one point I had vials of various flavors just dissolved in carriers to smell them. And I'd pass them around and ask people what they thought they smell like. And some people would say, oh, goat cheese. And other people would say manure for this one compound. So you can sort of tell that people, especially like John mentioned earlier, we have a lot of sense, we have a lot of aroma tied to our memories. And if you make an association with that early on, whether it's just like A equals B, or even if it's an emotional association, good or bad, you can carry that with you the rest of your life. And so it might be a combination of those two things.
Yeah, and I think an important thing to note is that even in utero, unborn baby is connected to the sensory experience of the mamas. And so they're already developing neural connections about good compounds and not good compounds. And so that when they're born, they can, in theory, protect themselves from eating something that's going to kill them. So it takes about 7 times for the human body to be okay with that something's not going to kill them. This is all this awesome research that we've got to learn over the years. But anyway, so it's such a pre-birth, you're already developing these associations.
Definitely, yeah. And and I see Mitch just said exactly the cilantro soap association. Exactly, it could be partially genetic, and that's exactly what John is mentioning.
Yeah.
With that, I think maybe that's a good segue into the second cheese.
Awesome. So the second cheese that we're going to be tasting tonight is Casadica de Bufala. It should be cut into almost a square or slightly rectangle shape. It's in the, if you keep moving to the right of that first one, Casadica de Bufala is a water buffalo milk cheese, soft ripened category from Northern Italy. We love this cheese, and it fit with what Pat was trying to accomplish for this particular part of the tasting. But Quattro Portoni is amazing. So water buffalo typically has its own, tends to have its own flavor profiles, but then within this style, it has its own unique, this stylistic experience that we'll have. Eat from the inside out, taste the inside, then taste the rind, then taste it together as Pat's teaching us.
Yeah, thanks, John. That's perfect. Exactly. So this is what's called a surface ripened cheese. That's the rind on the outside. That's a mold, and it sort of acts on the cheese and causes its own flavor creation on the outside. Some of it can seep in, but on the inside, you can get sort of a taste of what the cheese itself is without that undue influence of its surface, the surface bloomy rind. But when you do work your way to the rind, you can give it a smell and a taste, and just close your eyes. And some people instantly associate it with fresh cut mushrooms. Others, it's a little more murky, and they sort of say, oh, it sort of just smells like outside. It sort of smells earthy, like dirt almost. I don't want to make it, that doesn't sound very appetizing, but if you sort of, forest floor, there we go. That sounds a little more consumer friendly. And all that has to come with the mold. The mold itself on the surface here, it breaks down everything. It breaks down fat, it breaks down protein, it breaks down acid. Molds are very, very lytic, we like to say. They have to break down everything. And they break down fat and form a compound, a really specific compound called 1-octenol, which actually gets called mushroom alcohol, because if you smell this compound on its own, it does smell like mushrooms. And you might be picking up some of those earthy mushroomy notes on the surface of this cheese and perhaps throughout the whole thing, because it's a small compound. It can sort of pass and diffuse through. And there's so much that could be said, because we could talk about, this is caused by the mold. We could talk about the buffalo milk, and it's sort of having similar properties to the goat and sheep's milk, but just to a less great degree as far as getting those animalic flavors. And
it has a bit of wet hay flavor coming through as well.
I like that, the wet hay. And oh, this is actually one of my favorite facts about this compound, mushroom alcohol. If anyone, I'm not sure if these exist in Texas, but if anyone has those backyard mosquito burners where you hook up a propane tank to it and do it, you're usually supposed to add something to it. They have those chemical patch you put into it or crack next to it. And it's actually this compound. This mushroom alcohol is a really, really powerful attractant to mosquitoes. It's found naturally in our sweat, and that's one reason they're attracted to us, in addition to the carbon dioxide we breathe out. But maybe not the most appetizing anecdote, but I like to tell people, be wary when you're bringing bries to picnics or any white mold cheeses, like Casadica de Bufala included, because you may get more mosquitoes than you bargained for.
Now Kendall has an excuse of why she gets bitten by mosquitoes so much.
Perfect. You're just eating too much white bloomy rind cheese.
You can never have too much. I'm more worried about the bears getting my cheese.
That's true. I'm not sure if this is attracted to bears, but I think this, among everything else in the cheese and the human, is a powerful attractant of bears.
Yeah. So Robin made a comment here that the cheese is, I guess the cheese almost tastes like nothing to her, but that the rind tastes like decomposed granite when it's shoveled. So that aroma coming through.
I like that. That's probably the most descriptive. You talk about people associating aromas with certain memories or certain actions. I think Robin has an experience there shoveling some decomposed granite.
Yeah, now I'm going to have to do that at some point in my life. Thank you, Robin. Yeah, so typically like the cheese that we would typically showcase here wasn't producing the mushroom aromas and flavors that we were looking for. So my team tasted and picked this one out as the next best option. So like sometimes good like a brie style or a camembert will have like punch in the face mushroom flavor profile, but we didn't have that. And that's the beauty about cheese. Seasonally it changes, wheel to wheel it changes. And so we'll just, keep enjoying Robin. Decomposed granite. I'm going to go over to Mitch's house and he'll shovel some decomposed granite for us after the tasting. That's cool.
Fantastic. That can be included in the next box.
That sounds good. And these are paired with the whole wheat cracker. It's got this really nice sort of Christmas note. I associate the spices within its whole wheat sourdough, good salt, but it's a nice combination with this casataga. So, all right. Should we go to cheese number 3? Start hustling a little bit.
Sounds good. Let's keep going. And Stephanie mentioned smells like smelly socks, and that actually, yeah, the fat breakdown can also give that as well, in addition to the what we just described here.
That's a great compliment for cheeses like this. That's awesome. All right. The third cheese that you'll be tasting tonight, y'all, is Sapori del Piave. No, scratch that. Let's see. I want to make sure that the plate is done right. We actually have, it looks like
Texas Gold.
Plated Texas Gold first. So it's this, so it is Texas Gold that's in the 3 o'clock position. Yeah. So this is the piquant. So this is Texas Gold. This is from Veldhuizen Cheese Company. We did a behind the scenes cheese tasting with them in July. The family is awesome. Stuart and Connie and 2 of their daughters are running the operation. They make a majority of their milk is cow's milk, but they also have the first Texas sheep herd here. And they've been also making sheep's milk cheeses. And Texas Gold is one of their cow's milk. And they usually make in about, I think, 15 to 18 pound wheels. Their focus is on cheddar. They do some Gouda. They do some Alpine style flavor profiles. So this is a nice, firm cheese with a paraffin wax rind, which you can peel off. You don't need to eat it. And then it is paired with To Peach His Own by Jam Nation, a great peach jam. So I'll leave it to you to kind of guide us. You can eat this cheese as you wish, y'all.
Yeah, thanks, John. So this pecan butyric, this is an interesting flavor. It related to our last one we just talked about. It's a result of fat breakdown, or as we say scientifically, lipolytic flavors. Lytic means breakdown, lipo means fat, lipids, liposuction. And we went through this reaction earlier. I won't belabor the point, but just know that these little squiggly lines, those free fatty acids, different lengths cause different flavors. The shortest, most simplest one is what gives vinegar its aroma. You get a little longer, you get butyric acid, which is related to that sweaty sock note that we just talked about. Some people call it baby vomit, which it is. It is the key, smell compound in baby vomit. But in low levels, it's an important flavor compound in many, many different cheeses and dairy products. And you may be picking up a little bit of that here. Sweaty sock, sweaty baby vomit. Of course, you see why we like to call it piquant, because that sounds a little better. In cheese technology circles, we actually refer to it as rancid. And you may think of rancid as always negative. Not necessarily. If you look at the term rancidity, it actually has its scientific origins describing this reaction here, this light lipolytic reaction, the breakdown of fat. So if you ever hear someone say, "Oh, this cheese tastes rancid," and they don't mean it's been in your fridge, for years, they could be referring to this fat breakdown. And who knew baby vomit was so delicious? Yes, Philip, I so agree with you. In balance, I think it really can be a good flavor. And I've actually had the luck to try some cheeses made with milk where they basically ensured that butyric acid isn't formed, that there's nothing there. And you may think that even in cheeses you don't really taste really strong flavors, like in a mascarpone or mozzarella or Monterey Jack, milder cheeses. When this is absent, it lacks a lot of cheese flavor. This is one of those powerful background notes that gives a lot of cheesy flavors its cheesiness. For example, if anyone here is a big fan of mac and cheese, the powder they're using, fun fact, especially if you're a fan of the one that comes in a blue box that starts with the letter K, the powder they're using, it's real cheese in there, powdered cheese. They're using powdered blue cheese as one of the main flavors in there, and it's chock full of this stuff, and it sort of gives that nice generic, rich, cheesy flavor that a lot of cheeses we like for, and a lot of cheese-flavored products we like them for. And in high amounts, you start to get that it can almost cause a prickling, burning sensation on your tongue that some people may be picking up if they're really sensitive to it.
So on my palate tonight, wherever my palate exists in the world tonight so far, I'm picking up a taste memory of a jar of line-caught tuna in olive oil that I tasted in Italy a few years ago. Like, it's instantly where it's bringing me back, which is a crazy thing to say, but that's what my palate's picking up from this flavor profile tonight.
I like that. I mean, I'm the same way, where it's some things associate such strong memories for me that I can never disassociate it, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah. It must have just been the fact that I was in Italy that it stuck with me. Maybe that was it. But
there you go.
Okay, that's awesome. And with the what does everybody get when you pair that sort of butyric flavor profile with the peach jam when you add sweetness? And then we've got a question from Casey, Casey is one of a certified cheese professional and who chose all the pairings for tonight. Is that prickling related to the aged raw cow's milk reaction? So
that's a good question, Casey. Yeah, so when we think about burning, so literally that prickling on your tongue, it's caused by two main things in cheese. It's caused by these fatty acids that I mentioned. And it's also caused by a different set of reactions, which is literally histamine. Your tongue is getting itchy because it's having an allergic reaction, more or less. You think about it, at least in small amounts. And maybe some people have experienced this, maybe with cheese, but histamines are naturally occurring in almost any natural food product that you buy with any age on it. So for example, like John mentioned, canned fish actually is high in histamines, as is some cheeses, some wines. It can occur across a few different products. So it's definitely possible to get it in especially aged cheeses. And the raw milk, since there's less heat treatment to the milk, some reactions can go into overdrive because more things are left intact, and that's one such example.
all right. Well, if you have any more questions, anybody, just go ahead and ping them. We're on to our fourth cheese, which is now the Sapore del Piave, which I think you have to go back one slide for. This is an Italian style sort of hard cheese. Comes in, again, about that 15 to 20 pound wheel. It's got, well, you'll talk about the flavor profiles. But this has been one of our shop favorites, one of our wholesale successful cheeses for the past 8 to 10 years. It's just really fun on your palate. So I can't wait to hear about the flavor compounds.
Yeah, thanks, John. So this is a really fun to talk about because a lot of aged Italian style cheeses have this fruity note, which some people describe as roasted pineapple, some described as sort of bruised apple. I've heard some people say almost juicy fruit gum. They get really these intense fruity notes, which some people call really sweet, and they are interrelated. Again, a lot of it can be due to this breakdown of fat, like I mentioned earlier. Here's that same reaction I showed earlier. You have this intact fat molecule breaking the free fatty acids. Previously, we talked about individual fatty acid causing a flavor. Well, they can go on and react with other things and create even more interesting flavors. And this middle box here, we have something called esters, which is any chemist listening, they'll know esters are synonymous, at least in the aroma chemistry world, with fruity flavors. And so these cheeses are chock full of those, which can cause all association of those fruity flavors, like the pineapple I mentioned. Cheeses like this, I always associate almost with roasted pineapple kind of fruitiness. But other things can be formed as well that I mentioned earlier, like some of these alcohol compounds. So for example, the alcohol back in mushrooms, but lactones can also be formed, which is interesting compounds that cause almost milky, creamy, really rich dairy notes, with these cheeses are really high in as well. So that's just a little primer on the chemistry of it. And it definitely can increase with age. These reactions can take some time to occur. And they also require usually lower moisture content. So that's a lot of times why you don't see really soft cheeses develop fruity notes. And also because they're usually not old enough either.
Oh yeah, the flavor profile tonight is spectacular. So you mentioned roasted pineapple, and you said, I think, grilled pineapple. So everybody should go home and grill a pineapple after this to actually dial. I mean, that's where people come up with these great explanations. And like you said, a lot of these times these flavor profiles represent as sweet, which might lead you towards toffee or caramel flavor notes as well. But the pineapple, I think next time you open a piece of Parmigiano Reggiano, smell it and you'll get instantly hit with that flavor recognition if you like pineapple. So Mitch is going to have a grill next to the pile of decompose. I appreciate that, Mitch. But this cheese is tasting outstanding, and we paired it tonight, Pat, with a persimmon. So this
That's
sort of
great.
leathery textured, I kind of think of it more, it's not just a sweet fruit, but it's got this really nice depth to it. So pairing this sort of leathery texture with this really dry cheese, see what happens on your palate, y'all. Do you get any more, like sometimes when I taste this cheese, I get like a hint of bourbon, like a dark alcohol. See what happens for y'all. It's good.
I like that. That's a great pairing idea. I'm gonna have to try that now. I've never thought about pairing persimmon with aged Italian, like supported Del Piave. That's a good idea. Oh, Ryan and Susie Bates mentioned how much of basically everything we're doing tonight can be chalked up to suggestibility. And I'm going to tell you something professional tasters and sensory people never want to tell anyone. A lot can be chalked up to suggestibility. I hate to say it, but we're social creatures. And actually, I was talking to my boss today about, we were standing around a table tasting some products, and it's like everyone tastes what the most senior person in that meeting tastes. And it always seems to work out that way. And I hate to say it, but like John mentioned earlier, taste on the tongue, aroma in the nose combines for flavor, but all that's processed in the brain. And so taste at the end of the day is physical, definitely, clearly all this chemistry, but a lot of it's also mental and psychological, like we mentioned earlier, those ties to memory. So it's definitely suggestible. I like to think we're all detecting things uniquely, but maybe the names we're describing to, the associations you're making, are sort of what's really being suggested. And I'm okay with that, because eventually if enough people do it, we sort of agree on a set terminology for it, sort of like the evolution of a language. Like we've landed on salt. We all agree what salt tastes like. It tastes like salt. And hopefully we can eventually do that with the billion other flavors out there. It's a stretch goal, but one day maybe.
One day. Your flavor wheel is already taking off, so that's great. But I agree with that. It is suggestive. Oftentimes, we like to provide suggestions because some compounds are very upfront, and it gives you a more appreciation for the product itself. Like a wheel of Comte may have up to 110 or 107, I think is what, like, unique flavor compounds within it, like within a wheel. The likelihood of you picking up all 107 of those is there's zero chance, right? That's just not going to happen. But if we mention sort of the onion notes, or that the caramelized onion notes, or the brown butter, or the hint of garlic, you may then have a more of appreciation for it. When we're doing tastings at the shop, usually it's just about the yum factor. Does it make you happy? If you like the smell of sweaty gym socks, I know exactly what cheeses you're gonna love. If you like the smell of decomposed granite, I got a cheese for you now, right? So that's what we're always constantly learning, and a lot of our language that we have around food is not as advanced as it could be, to help narrow in and explain some of these things. So I think it's exciting. So so let's see. When Stephanie said, when I eat the persimmon, I taste almonds. All right, a couple more people. Awesome. Okay. Shall we move on to the next?
Sounds good. Yeah.
All right. So we have Cave Aged Shandoka. This is from, oh, wow. Yeah, there we go. This is from LeClaire Farms in Wisconsin. They were traditionally just a goat's milk producer, but back a handful of years ago, they started to partner with a local company and created this cave-aged Shandoka. You see the picture of it on the screen with Pat. It's a cloth-bound cave-aged cheese, and it's got both goat and it's got cow in it. It won best in the country a few years ago. Super successful cheese in the marketplace. Tastes great, but you're gonna get the earthy, musty. There's a perfect example tonight of what Pat is trying to explain. And so yeah, this is one of our top sellers. This is a great cheese. So go ahead and eat it, and it's paired tonight with a cup of tin mustard. So even if you don't like mustard, this is a great product to try. It's a whole grain, sort of, I don't know, maybe Bavarian style. It's not a spicy mustard. It's more of like a creamy mustard, with these nice whole mustard seeds that kind of pop in your mouth. It's outstanding. So Pat, go ahead.
Oh yeah, thanks, John. So as John mentioned, this made in Wisconsin, sort of aged in Illinois. Actually, it's a cool pairing between, or I shouldn't say pairing, it's a cool partnership between a producer and a cheese aging, or affineur, as we say. One of my favorite all-time cheeses, actually. I remember when they released it, I was actually working at a local cheese shop, and I'm very excited to taste it. And yeah, it's especially as you work your way to the surface, but really throughout the whole cheese, you get that earthy, musty sort of note in a good way. And I really like how that, I really like asparagus smell. That's a good way of putting it. And that brings up a good point, that some of the earthy compounds, one that is in this cheese and is actually causes a lot of earthy aromas and a lot of things, is called geosmin. Anyone is familiar with the term petrichor, which is literally the smell after it rains. It has a literary term. It's called petrichor. That's caused by this compound geosmin. It's naturally present in soil, lots of things. It's formed by microbes in the soil, and some of these microbes happen to be growing on this cheese as well. But other compounds as well. Here we have something called a pyrazine compound. Those converge on earthy, but almost grassy or green vegetable-like. So I might explain some of the asparagus smell in that Clay was experiencing. And all these can sort of combine together to almost really give, I almost like to call them, it's cabbage patch, because that sort of invokes some dirt, some vegetables, maybe there's an oxen tilling the soil next to it, adding some interesting aroma as well. And what's interesting about these compounds, specifically geosmin and these borneol compounds, is in the presence of acid, they get changed a little bit. They get altered a little bit, and the earthiness goes away. So heaven forbid, I mean, part of the reason you're eating this cheese is for its earthy, interesting flavors. But if it is a little too much for you, sprinkling of lemon juice can do it. And we take advantage of this reaction in other cases in food as well. If anyone here is into fishing, really likes catfish, but catfish tastes like dirt sometimes, you'll know that adding a slice of lemon and squeezing over your catfish really helps eliminate that dirt flavor. And you're not actually just covering it up, you're actually altering these compounds the same way I described here. So this earthiness is common across lots of different foods. I really like it in the chandoka. I think it does it really balances well with sort of the nice salt level you get, that slight goaty animalicness because it's goat and cow milk together. It's a knockout overall.
Yeah, the mustard has a good vinegar note to it. So the earthiness goes a little bit away when you have it with the mustard. It's really nice. We have the rind is pure sandy dirt. Yeah, if it looks like dirt and it smells like dirt, it's probably going to taste like dirt. That's one of my favorite sayings around natural rinds. Like this has, you can see in the picture that picture has the cloth still on, but once you take the cloth off, it's got some of that a bite to it, like dirt. Again, like soil. We'll call it. That's what a wine taster would call it, soil.
Yeah, that sounds better than dirt. That does sound a little more.
Yeah, and that was a great pairing. That's all. Oh, even Kendall is chiming in from the back room. Kendall's babysitting the kids right now, so she chimed in with that. She loves the pairing tonight. So somebody is asking, why do we enjoy tasting dirt or soil?
That's a great question.
It's a really great question.
And I mean, there's actually there's a big vein of study in the flavor world and sensory world, but why do we enjoy certain flavors, it seems like innately, and why we despise some innately, and why do some of those change? Bitter is a good classic example where we've over time as people seem to have developed a affinity for bitter, even though we're built and innately bitter means poison. So that's why one reason why most of us are very acute to it. Why does that change? And why do we I like the playground days idea, but it is cultural. If you talk to people from other cultures, they're not so big on these kinds of flavors, which is interesting. Just like we're not so big on other flavors from other cultures. So I think part of it's nurture, part of it's nature.
That's awesome. All right, I just posted what the last pairing was, number 5. Casey did say that tasted like cleaning out erasers from an old chalkboard, which I think is cool. And we got a bunch of people said yeah, absolutely, that's what it tasted like. So I'm going to spotlight I'm going to spotlight your video again. I made a mistake there. I got too excited. So the next cheese that we're tasting, Pat, tonight is Widmer's 10-year cheddar. So this should be a lot of fun for you. Joe Widmer is a 3rd-generation cheesemaker, Wisconsin. He's still making cheese in the house that he grew up in. The basement level is the cheese plant. The upstairs is where they live. His son is involved now, so they're 4th generation. And this has been a really popular cheese for us over the years. In fact, on our 10-year anniversary, Nicholas, who is on tonight, one of our certified cheese professionals and our director of retail, he came up with the idea of handing out free 10-year cheddar chunks to anybody that purchased on our 10-year anniversary. And so anybody that came into the shop didn't even have to purchase. It was awesome. But it's the bright orange triangle that's on your plate. And we've got that paired with balsamic Cipollina onions tonight.
Oh, that's a great pairing, and I'll talk about why, because the sulfur really plays well in both of them. So one of my favorite cheeses, one of my favorite cheese makers, like John said, he's training in the 4th generation already. They're pretty close friends of mine after I was living and working in Wisconsin. He's also one of the few cheese makers who seems to have cracked the code that he puts a lot of his cheeses in opaque packaging, like this black shrink wrap here. And most people don't like opaque packaging. People, milk still comes in clear jugs, even though it's really detrimental to the milk as far as light. But people like to see what they eat. But he's cracked the code. His cheese is so good, people don't need to see it. They know it's going to be good. And as you're smelling it and chewing it and sort of rolling around your mouth, and after you swallow it, you may be getting a sulfury note. And one way of thinking about that is struck match. Some people more associate with like a boiled egg yolk kind of thing. Those kinds of things. And where that's coming from, it's literally a sulfur compound. Here I have one such examples, methanethiol. There are certain amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins, that contain sulfur. And as that protein breaks down through the action of microbes, and especially age, especially 10 years of age, as you might imagine, these microbes and the reactions sort of clip away at these amino acids, and you form interesting sulfur compounds, which come about, and you can definitely smell them on Widmer's cheeses. He uses a culture blend that really lends itself to this. And Stephanie mentioned bitter. And yes, the thing with aging protein is when you get other flavors, you also can get bitter with it. Like I mentioned, bitter is sort of a side product of protein breakdown. And Philip mentioned off category in the wheel, onion and garlic. That's a good point, and that was sort of something I made that I didn't think about. That in dairy technology circles, when we refer to onion, garlic, we're not referring to those as flavors per se. We're referring to that if cows accidentally get into a part of the field that has onions and garlic, they'll carry that flavor through to their milk. In that context, it's considered a defect because it was like the cows were being naughty and ate food they shouldn't have. But yeah, if you find those cheese flavors and cheeses because they were there because of the age or because they were intentionally added as flavorants, then yeah, definitely not off. Look at that sulfur from Yellowstone National Park, Lisa says. Now that is a great, thanks, Philip.
Yeah.
Thank you for my very long-winded mea culpa.
Yeah. Philip heard an apology built into that. I often picture, when I eat this cheese, often I'm reminded of a grapefruit, like biting into a big grapefruit and whatnot.
I think that's a great parallel because grapefruits are bitter, and the main bitter in that in grapefruits called naringin, it actually is sulfur containing. So there may be some overlap here.
It's possible, but having been to Yellowstone National Park, that definitely loved pulling down the windows when you're driving through the sulfur field. It was amazing. Kids might not like it so much, but I did. Smells like the shower at our in-laws' place. Okay, at least you put in parentheses with unrelated or untreated sulfur well water. I could have just been an insult to your in-laws, perhaps. Awesome. All right. Great. Okay. And now pairing it with the onions. I haven't done that. And you said you were going to talk about why pairing with the onion makes sense.
Oh, yeah. So the main aromas associated with onions are these sulfur-containing compounds. And it's actually pretty funny. They're very volatile, onions, even more so than cheese. It's slightly different versions of these sulfur compounds. And as you're chopping onions, they're entering the air, and they'll float up and they'll dissolve into the water of your tears, form something called sulfenic acid, and that's actually what causes you to cry. It basically turns the clear part, the liquid part in your eyes, your tears slightly acidic, and your eyes don't like that. But it's another sulfur-containing compound, and so I do like the idea of sort of taking a sulfury cheese with onions, which main flavor is also due to sulfur. But then balancing it out with that balsamic sort of sweet acidic, I think that's a great pairing.
I'm sorry you're not getting to eat it right now. It is really good. It's really good.
We need to invent that technology. You know, we have
Yeah.
smell-o-vision, but now we need, you know, taste-o-zoom or something.
Taste-o-vision, Taste-o-Zoom. Zoom already, everybody's already bought all the URLs with Zoom. You'll have to come up with something new. One of the questions that Ryan and Susie just asked, and we have one more cheese, y'all. We're going to get to it in just a minute, but is how can we relate the concept of terroir to all of the chemistry that we're talking about? Do they connect?
They can, definitely. I mean, like we mentioned, I think, I'm sorry, I already forgot his name. Like Philip said, that onion garlic is a perfect example of terroir. Like what the cows are eating, the flavor is literally being carried through. Those compounds are going straight through to the final cheese. And that's a really extreme example. It's usually not that direct in cheese because of how much is going on. Just like in wine, there is a lot of transformations that are happening along the way, either through the yeast or through the winemaker or through the bottling process and age. Same can be said with cheese as well. But it definitely has an effect. In fact, in terroir, usually, especially in the French way, you know, it's pretty strongly associated with the land and the soil and the practices. I definitely agree that that's an important part in cheese making, but I'd expand terroir to include other things in cheese making. The animals itself, each cow is different as far as its metabolism, the milk it produces. Where the cheese is being made, the producer itself, the sort of the natural flora and microbes growing there, and where the cheese is aging can have a dramatic impact as well. So each one of those are levers that are being pulled either intentionally or intentionally that is shifting this chemistry. And the onion garlic's one really clear example, but there's other smaller examples as well. You think about sort of the cows eating grass. The grass contains certain compounds that when they're broken down or when they get carried through the milk, you almost get that grassy kind of vegetal flavor in cheeses that can occur. But there's beta carotene in grass, which causes the yellow color in a lot of really intensely yellow grass-fed cheese, grass-fed milk cheeses. So that's one example of terroir going on there.
It's awesome. My pairing's all gone, so I feel like I need to go to the next cheese. That was so good. So our last and final cheese is Gabrielle Coulet Roquefort. So this is a sheep's milk cheese from France. It is cave ripened in these natural caves that formed into the sides of the hills outside of this town. There's only 7 producers in the world that can make Roquefort because the cheese has to be aged in these caves, and only 7 families have the rights to those caves. And so you may see lots and lots of different brands, but there's only 7 producers. There might be co-packing and things like that. But Gabrielle Coulet is a really great producer of the cheese. We love it. We love it. And tonight it's got a firmness to it. It's not super creamy. So you can actually hold it up and pick it up, but it's beautiful tonight. So it is paired with a 72% dark chocolate from Vietnam, Tien Gang. And again, there's some really fun things that happen in chocolate. It's made by Maru. It's an amazing chocolatier out of Vietnam. But together, these things are going to be home runs. So, but first start with the blue and eat from the inside out. Is unlike the other cheeses that were ripened from the outside in, this cheese is ripened from the inside out. And so definitely start from the inside. All right, go ahead.
Thanks, John. Yeah, no, exactly like you said. We tried that white mold cheese earlier. That's what we call an externally ripened cheese. This is an internally ripened cheese. The mold was present all along, actually. They added the mold to the milk. But later on in the process, they pierce it with needles that allows channels of air to get in there, and the mold grows off that air. It needs an aerobic environment. It needs oxygen. And once it gets its oxygen, what it actually does is it breaks down the fat. I know I sound like a broken record. I did intersperse it with some protein breakdown at least, but certain species of mold can break down fat in really unique ways and form different compounds. And the one that's of note here is something called 2-heptanone, also known as blue heptanone, because it smells really, really like blue cheese. Sometimes you might hear this almost be called medicinal. That's trying to do that in a positive way. Sometimes I hear perfumey or flowery in a way. All of these are the good ways of describing it. It really is an interesting reaction overall. And I did put a picture here that I took a few years ago of what's important. When you receive a lot of blue cheeses, especially the things like Roquefort, they come wrapped in foil. They don't come in vacuum packed packages usually. They may be in a sealed bag, but they didn't pull a really strong vacuum on it. That's because, like I mentioned, the mold is living in your cheese right now. The mold is still alive. It is still growing and thriving. And if you rob it of oxygen, it becomes stressed. And as you might imagine, if I robbed you of oxygen, you'd become stressed. Your stress response would be less innocuous than the molds. But the molds, what it does is it changes color. So it can get really light in color. And also can produce off flavors. It can produce some really harsh compounds that almost taste like and at the end here is a certain type of compound known as ketones. And you may have heard of another ketone that's very common. I love the smell of this one. I don't like tasting it. Acetone, nail polish remover. So when mold gets stressed, it can form some of that, which gives it a really harsh flavor. Sometimes people say painty. It tastes like paint or paint thinner or nail polish remover. Quickly, real quick, I know we've been talking for over an hour now. This cheese is Roquefort, one of the most famous cheeses in all the world. The mold that's used in Roquefort is called Penicillium roqueforti. And you may be thinking, oh, it was nice of them to name the cheese after the microbe. Nope, it was the other way around. Back when they were discovering and trying to figure out what things were growing, they isolated this mold from Roquefort, and it's named after the cheese, not the other way around. And there's lots of examples like that in the dairy world, which is pretty cool. So I'd love to hear what other people are saying. As Matthew points out, it is sheep's milk, so you may get some of those sheepy, animalic, barnyardy notes as well. And I see the lanolin, definitely, yep.
Yeah, this wheel has got a much more pronounced lanolin, good salt content, but you do get with that very clear blue aroma, piquant on the back of the palate. There's blue can do one of two things typically. You can have this sort of piquant flavor profile on the back of your palate, or a cooling blue if you've had Stilton before. Oftentimes that is really cooling on your palate. Like that's what they're going for. It's pretty cool. So Dr. Pepper, thank you, Dr. Pepper. Taste horse blanket, which again could be amazing for some people, or a not so great description for other, depending on their experience. And so with that chocolate, I think it's a home run pairing. But Pat, do you have anything? So Stephanie is saying that the chocolate detracts, maybe takes away too much. That's good to know. Do you have anything else to add on the blues or any other slides? This was obviously, it was amazing. I texted one of my team members on the chat window to ask if I missed anything, and both of us are just geeking out too much to really know if we forgot to ask something or say something. We're just having a great time. But does anybody have any more questions? Again, Pat, as we're getting to close out here, I just want to take a minute to say thank you. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us tonight. We are so very grateful, Kendall and I, that you're willing to share what you love with all of our friends and family and guests. It's an honor, right? As a cheese geek myself, getting to learn from you has been a pleasure. You make learning so much fun. In fact, this morning I caught myself watching your lipolysis video for 15 minutes because I thought it was awesome.
My apologies.
No, it was one of my team members asked for a video about lipolysis. I said, sure, Pat's probably got one. And then I watched the whole thing because I just fell in love. But I'm really grateful for you for taking a few minutes out of your, an hour and a half out of your first week at a new job to share your passion. My hope is that in the future we'll get to do some more of these cheese 201s, because my education in cheese is really just beginning after 12 years of studying it. And so I personally want to learn more. But this was awesome. Thank you for letting us live our mission. Thank you for everybody that came onto this call or this event tonight. Super amazing. And what I want to do, like, unless there's another question, which I don't think so, I want to come off of unmute all of you so that you can thank Pat yourselves, because he's awesome and he deserves all of that positivity. So let me unmute everybody and thank you all for being a part of this experience. Now,
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Very well done.
And these slides to John, and he can distribute them as a PDF to everyone.
Thank you.
Peace.
Cool. So make sure you sign up for the next one. Give the Antonellis a lot of business.
and you're no longer a struggling student, though.
I know, they have some on the calendar.
Thank you, everybody, for being a part of this. More cowbellia next time. I like that. Much more cowbell. You can always have more cowbell. Fun and tasty. Awesome. Well, y'all, thank you so much. If anybody else wants to say anything, just unmute yourself and yell real loud.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Who made the chocolate?
Really.
Who made the chocolate? Maru is the company that makes the chocolate.
Okay.
Thank you, Pat. I appreciate you so very much. Have an awesome day.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Good night.